This is the Constructionist Podcast, where we take ancient stories, the person of Jesus, current events and topics, and help you construct a new Christian worldview that's relevant and loving to those around you. I'm your host, Kevin Bates. I'm a semiotician and community builder, looking at the signs of the times to build a better future together. Hey, welcome everybody. You're tuned into the Constructionist Podcast, and tonight we're continuing with this topic of our basic existence, constructing a worldview. We desire for you to be able to navigate your life with a framework of worldview that is relevant and loving to people. That's a big difference in what we're doing compared to what others have done in the past. So we are back into an every week broadcast and diving deep into developing an honest, loving worldview. And if you remember from previous podcasts, we're using an outline of worldview development from a Belgian atheist philosopher by the name of Leo Apostel. So a worldview or worldview is the fundamental cognitive orientation of an individual or society, encompassing the whole of the individual's or society's knowledge and point of view. So it's a fundamental cognitive orientation. It's full of values, it's full of ethics, it's full of understanding, it's full of thinking, it's full of framework, it's full of history, it's full of future, it's full of hope, it's full of all kinds of things. It's full of understanding, but it's a fundamental cognitive orientation. We use our brains to develop a worldview. So here's the framework. An explanation of the world, number one. And we did that probably a month ago. We tried to explain the world the best that we know it. And then where are we heading? And so that's where last week we talked about heaven and hell. And are we really destined for heaven and destined for hell as we've always understood it? And that's something to really think through. Now, tonight, we're talking about values and answers to ethical questions, or values maybe that answer ethical questions. So what should we be doing with our destination, impending destination, or what should we be doing with our explanation of the world? And then a methodology. How are we going to carry this out? How are we going to attain the goals of our worldview? And then what is true and false? That's where we're going to get into truth, objective, subjective, truth. That's going to be a fun one in a couple of weeks. And then we use the building blocks to put it all together. So we look at the past, we look at the present, we look at the future, and we construct, we're called constructionists, we're going to construct a worldview. So this 6-point framework is where we are, or what we're using to build a more loving, understanding, and compassionate worldview. So whether you're joining us live now or whether you're going to be listening to this in the future, what we desire is we want to have you answer or ask questions in the chat. We want you to leave comments on whatever social media channel you listen to, because we really want you to learn to construct something. Because if we don't learn to construct something, we're not going to move forward. If you reject something in the past, or our framework is disrupted in some way, and we're not constructing something for the future, usually we just revert back to what we know. We just revert back to what's in the past. So this is our thinking space where we present ideas and thoughts. We kind of muse around a little bit. Tonight, we're going to muse around a lot. We don't have any cut and dry answers for you when it comes to big ethical questions. Sheree is going to take the last section, and hopefully we're going to get to a bonus section there. But especially some of the things that she's going to be talking about, there's just really not clear answers on. And I think that ethical questions in general, there's not clear answers on. Jake's going to take some scientific ones. Sometimes talking about science is a little more cut and dry than talking about maybe some bigger moral dilemmas that we have in life. So this is a thinking space, and I hope that you learned something from today. So welcome, Sheree and Jake. These are my two associates from Resonate, and we do this Constructionist podcast each every week. So welcome. I'm really appreciative of both of you. You can financially support us by following the link on the chat or in the show notes or whatever social media platform you listen to. There will be links that you can connect into resonatelife.org, and you can go over to the give tab and connect into that giving site. But most importantly, we want you to interact with us. We want you to join us on this each and every week. And when we're better together, we learn better together, and when we can have an iterative conversation, we can grow together, and hopefully by the end of at least this hour, we'll come up with at least one solution to some moral dilemma, or maybe just a little bit of framework to understand moral dilemma. Okay, so I'm going to take the first section, and we are talking about values and answers to our ethical questions. Now, there's a couple of definitions I want to give us, because a lot of people misunderstand or misinterpret values and passions. When I have conviction or passion towards something, that's an expression of what I value. So if I am expressing something, it's the outcome of what I've maybe learned over a lifetime or maybe learned in the last week, and I'm reacting. So my passion is definitely something different than value. So over the last 2 years, what we've seen is very little value or very little values and a lot of passion. So we need to sift through and try to figure out, well, what are values versus what are passions? So I was on Twitter the other day, and Adam Grant said this on September 13th, 2022. So very fresh material. Which I find interesting and meaningful, what he said. Yet I believe what he said needs to be unpacked, because we can tweet out whatever we want off the top of our head, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So much of our culture right now, again, I'll say, is built out of passion and not value. So a lot of people claim values. Well, these are my values, and that's what I'm standing up for. But yet it's really just a passion. And most passions follow groupthink. Most do. Now, what he says, and he's an organizational psychologist, what Adam Grant says is following your passion is a luxury. Following your values is a necessity. Passion is a fickle magnet. It pulls you towards your current interests. Values are a steady compass. They point you towards future purpose. Passion brings immediate joy. Values bring lasting meaning. I would say there's a lot of truth there, that people follow passion over value. So some claim, though, that our passions are built out of echo chambers. And I would say that's not true. I probably have believed that off and on over the last handful of years, that our passions are built out of echo chambers. But psychologically, or our algorithms on social media or on the internet, when we're scrolling through Instagram and it seems like we're talking about a subject, and all of a sudden Instagram is talking about the same subject. So when we have those coincidental type epiphanies or whatever we're having, it seems like that would be what's fueling our passion. But psychologically, we know that when we hold to some conviction or when we hold to some passion, and we hear the antithesis or the argument against that passion, that solidifies our passion even greater. So listening to the opposite usually solidifies our passions even more. So the counter argument fortifies and hardens our brains to the point that we become inflexible, and we're not even able to hear the other side, or the opposite side, if we want to say it that way. We're not even able to hear it. We're not even able to listen to it. That doesn't happen just by hearing people that agree with you. That happens by, and it might be fortified a little bit. Oh, yeah. Dan down the street, Sally up the street, Joe up there, like they agree with me. This scientist agrees with me on this. But what fortifies and structurally builds our passions is listening to the counter argument. So, what are our values? What could be values that maybe you hold dear to? Some people have never listed out their values. They've never really had that exercise of what do I value? And what I tell people is to discover what you value, just kind of sketch out on a paper what you spend most of your time with, or who do you spend most of your time with, or what ideas do you think about the most. And if you find yourself thinking about like maybe a political subject and it's just a reoccurring type, just regurgitating theme in your head, maybe that's something that you value, maybe too much, that maybe that's something that is causing you to maybe even stumble or falter in life, and it's just consuming your brain. Just know that what you value, usually you spend your time doing or spend your time, in activity towards. Usually, sometimes that's a passion. Most of the time, though, you start digging into what you're really spending your time doing and thinking about. Those are your values. So, loyalty is a value, spirituality is a value, humility, compassion, honesty, kindness, integrity, selflessness, determination, generosity, courage, tolerance, trustworthiness, altruism, appreciation, empathy, self reliance, and attentiveness. So, those are things that we value and spend our time doing these things. So, we spend our time even in activities you might enjoy. Well, skiing season's coming up. So, you might enjoy skiing or you might enjoy hiking. You're trying to get a fall thing in before the weather hits. And you're trying to sneak that passion in. How you behave in that passion and what you're doing in that passion definitely shows your value. So if you value humility and compassion, when you go out and hike, you're going to leave the area, excuse me, you're going to, humility and compassion, you might bring somebody along that has never hiked or camped or done something like that before. So you have maybe a heart of honesty and kindness towards that person in that activity, whatever it is. You can think about those things in your own time. But beliefs also are different than values, which are different than passions.
Can I ask
Yeah.
something, Kevin, about
Yeah.
values?
Yeah.
Your list of values are all positive.
Yeah.
Do values have to be positive?
Gosh, I thought about that after I wrote the list because I just kind of looked at, and I think that values can be negative, but I want to have good intent. I want to have positive intent towards people. And I want to say that people don't value hate.
Right. No, I think you're onto something. Like, I think people don't value hate, but maybe they value life to be a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
or they value their own group, whatever that is, so much
Version
that,
or whatever. Yeah.
yeah,
Could that be hateful?
yeah, I think so.
I think it could be hateful. Yeah. I think the group could be, have a sense of apathy or a sense of negativity, whatever that word is that we want to, that's not positive.
What if your value is sarcasm?
I think that's a disorder. To be honest. I think people who are sarcastic are just insecure and they're trying to cover up for their own insecurities. That's what I think.
Yes. So what if Rob says that he values big emotions?
Okay.
So what I hear you saying is that a negative value is a disorder, or a positive value, or a positive is the value.
Well, I would say that a positive value is more of, well, I don't know yet. Maybe we need to muse around that a little bit.
Can I
Because I would say,
try something?
is a negative value sin? I mean, is that what we
I
would
think
categorize as
Shrey wanted
sin?
to say something there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like with another example, I doubt people really value greed. I do think people value success,
Yeah.
And they value
Yeah.
money.
which could be like an indicator of
Yeah.
success. Or maybe
Right.
people value power.
Yeah.
So like greed is the expression of that value, but I don't think it's the value.
Totally.
Or greed can be an expression of that value, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, some people value, I think the value is collecting. That would be a value. I'm a collector, right? So I value collections and, having a coin collection or a stamp collection versus a cocaine collection. I mean, it's just like there's a difference, So like one is they both could be addictions, right? But the value is collecting. What we collect and how that's treated becomes a moral issue. That's the moral issue. How I'm hurting people with my collecting. Well, let me finish introducing some other thoughts, and we can definitely go back to that because Shreya, can you put a marker on that to make sure that we go back to it?
I can.
All right.
What specifically?
Can values be negative versus values be positive? I think we need to go back to that. So what I was about ready to say is beliefs are basic assumptions that we make about the world. Where we get those beliefs, you can get those from the Bible, you can get those from other spiritual texts. Your beliefs are assumptions that you're making basically maybe off of just your own opinion sometimes, or what somebody told you once back in the day becomes your beliefs, or what an ancient text tells you back in the day, that becomes a belief, an assumption about the way the world is and how we are to maybe be in the world. Our values stem from beliefs. So if we believe in God, or we believe in this Jesus God, and Jesus then forgives sins, and we're to be like little Christ, little Jesuses, then we would then forgive people. We would forgive sins. So the value becomes forgiveness. The belief is that Jesus did this for me, so I can do this for others. Passion, though, so if we have beliefs, then our assumptions, values come out of those beliefs, then passion is a state of emotion that we're acting on in those values. So it's that intense, driving, sometimes overmastering feeling or conviction in the value that stems from belief. So when somebody is disloyal, does that make you angry? And then do you just flip your crap over somebody being disloyal? Or if somebody is like not kind and they just think that being right is the answer and they're not kind, are we angry? Our passions for kindness, or our passion is the expression of the emotion of the conviction or the value, where it all stems from those types of things. So there's some ethical lenses that I want to look through tonight. And these are really important because these are how our ethics, or our values, let's say, these are how our values are formed. And I want to say all my values are formed from Scripture. That's just not true or real to say. I can weigh my values or my ethics towards Scripture, but it definitely, our values have a cultural component, a subjective, experiential component to them that we do have to weigh in on those things. Otherwise, we don't live in reality. And we need to live in reality. That's what we discussed first week. And so we're going to ground ourselves in reality when it comes to our values. Okay, so values and ethics. Let's just talk about ethics for a minute. I'm going to use interchangeably some words. Ethics are not the same as feelings. Passions have feelings in them, but ethics are not the same as feelings. Ethics or values are not the same as religion. Ethics are not law. Ethics are not the same as cultural norms. And ethics are not science. So they might have scientific components or discussions around them, but that's not, it's like my friend Tara would say, that we don't believe in science. We might follow science. We might value scientific methodology, but we don't believe in science. So a lot of people confuse belief, values, ethics, and like in this case, what they believe in, science. So there's lenses that we look through to develop values. Like why do I value empathy, appreciation, altruism, and trustworthiness? Why would I ever value that? So we have different lenses that we look through that we need to be very careful when we look through these lenses. Some people only look through one lens, like my rights, right? So when you have the rights lens, where there's basically like law and practices protect and respect our human rights, that's a lens that we look through. So a value that we have needs to look through what we'll call the rights lens. But that's one lens of many. So a lot of people get hung up on maybe the justice lens on one pendulum swung side of the justice lens. So those people who think that there's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, let's, if you murder somebody, let's send them to the electric chair. That ethic or that value that you're stating, or even that belief, is seen through a justice lens. And so that justice lens in its basic form is each person should be given their due. One side of that lens, yes, we should all be given human rights, equal opportunities, and work on equity and equality. Yes, those are just things. But a lot of people just like hang out on one side of the camp, and just are the eye for an eye type of person and just kill them because they're, this or that. We just need to kill them. So the justice lens is a very careful lens that we need to think through and see through, because equal treatment, I believe in. I also believe in grace and forgiveness. And so how do we see through justice? Then the utilitarian lens. This is where how my action impacts others. Do my values impact other people? And then that leads into another lens called the common good lens. And that is the community or the communal, like what people would say, can I say social lens? It's a more social lens that people think through. So we sell our possessions and give to the poor for the common good. I would say whatever you think about Patagonia right now, that's a common good lens that person saw through. So the owner of Patagonia, if you didn't read the news, set up a trust that gives that money to the cause that he believed in for the common good of all humanity. And whether you agree with how global warming is coming about or whatever you believe, and if you criticize him for how that is his ethical lens, that's his value lens that he saw through with his company. Then the virtue lens, where there's certain virtues that I would say are more innate to human beings, our humanity that provides the development of our entire humanity. These are dispositions maybe that we have. These are habits that we have. And so this is where like maybe love fits into. Love is a virtue. Fairness might be considered a virtue. So we see through a virtue lens what's good for humanity. Then there's the care lens, where we use the care of the earth, the care for others, the care of humanity. Maybe this is where empathy fits in. That the empathy virtue is, or the empathy value is seen through the lens of care. And so this is a very relational lens. It is, well, is this the lens of kindness? This is the lens of alongsideness, coming alongside people. So these are the lenses that we help us, I guess I should say, help us develop our values. We might have a certain level of belief, yet my personal experience tells me something, and my cultural integration tells me something. How I'm showing up in the world tells me something. And so then I start using these lenses. So you might not agree with certain things that are happening in the world. You might not agree with what certain people say. You have to ask the question, why? You have to ask the question, what values am I holding on to and developing that are making me say no or yes? When I say no or yes to something, or I get passionate, angry, upset, start acting out, even turn to violence over something, you have to ask yourself, what value am I basing that on? Does my beliefs point towards that action? Because honestly, all of that develops into a worldview, how you see the world. All of it develops through these lenses is how we see the world and how we act in the world. And we need to be very careful when we act out in the world. Is that harming people? Is there care? Is it utilitarian? Is it virtue-based? What is it based on? And those are careful lenses. So an ethical question or an ethical dilemma that is pretty common in psychology or ethics class, if you ever take an ethics class in like online master's class or something. So if you take an ethics class, one of the dilemmas that they'll throw at you is the trolley problem. And the trolley problem is there's a trolley that is headed down the tracks. And the tracks split into two tracks. So on one track, on one set of tracks, there's one person standing on that set of tracks. And if the trolley takes that one track, that one set of tracks, that trolley is going to kill that one person. But if the trolley takes the other set of tracks, so remember the tracks split in two. If the trolley takes the other set of tracks, there's now 5 people on that set of tracks. And if the trolley takes the tracks, the trolley will kill 5 people. So that age-old, is it better to kill one person and save 5? Or is it better to kill 5 and save the one? Now, somebody that's just cold is going to say, well, my ethics and values say kill 5 because they're worthless. That one person is the means of production for all of society. And so we need to save them. That's how somebody has answered that in my life. Other people will say, well, that one person is just sitting there alone. So obviously they're a loser because they're alone. So they just need to be killed to save the 5 who are already in community. And what that means is that they are actually working for the health of society. And so they need to be saved. Kill the one. So I just give that simple example, right, of what you value and what you see, the one person or the 5 person. How you see them is whether or not you'll react, have passion towards them, be angry towards them, and speak poorly about them. Now, let's just say you're not going to kill them. You're just going to speak poorly about them. You're going to get on Facebook and maybe just rail on that one person or rail on that 5%.
Pun intended.
Nah, no pun intended. Right. All right. So let's get into our discussion. That's a lot to unpack already.
Are we going to answer that?
Yeah, and we're
ourselves?
going to let's get
The
into a
trolley
discussion. And well, let's just discuss it all. We can go back. Sharia, what were we going to go back to?
Oh, can values be negative?
Oh, let's talk about that for a while. Go ahead. Start out that discussion.
Yeah. I think an expression of values can be negative. I don't believe that people choose to hold negative values.
Yeah, I have a hard time with that too.
Yeah, and when we express those things, I think it's probably covering over a value that is more positive but is unhealthy, or I like the word disordered, not in a like a pathological or a diagnosis kind of sense, but just in a not fitting the framework of how, you know, we're all nature, we're all community, and when something is out of order, then it causes harm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. I think that it's when our values become disordered. And let's say love turns to apathy, and that becomes disordered. I think most people that have love, or that most human beings value love, even though they express apathy.
I mean,
Yeah.
even going the more disorder, you could say when love turns into concupiscence.
Say that again?
Take that word and unpack that, because I just heard Cupid and concupiscence and
Concupiscence?
my language vocabulary is very small.
Extreme lust.
Oh,
When love turns into extreme lust, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, that's an ethical question of what do we accept, as love.
What I heard Shreya say is that you choose your values.
I think when we're asked to speak about them, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so so then what displays our values if it's not a choice? How we spend our time, how we make our friends,
How we treat our friends,
Well,
how we make our money.
do you believe that some things are inherited?
Like,
value-wise?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Or is that a family system?
Family systems are where values are given.
by inherited, do you mean genetically? Like, are we genetically disposed to value certain things?
Well, like some people believe in original sin. Do you believe in original value? Like our human nature, is our human nature like the Dalai Lama would say, our nature is good. And that's an inherited value. Goodness is an inherited value. Where negative emotions, the Dalai Lama would also say that negative emotions are because of environmental reasons. So we adopt then sin into our lives. So are we born there's a couple of historical Christian ideas. Are we born good, or the propensity toward, or bent towards good? Are we born bent towards sin? Are we born pure and good from the start? Are we born with sin?
I would agree with the Dalai Lama on that point. I think he said it well.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I think,
definitely.
and even Genesis 1 and through 3, if you follow that story, our inerrant inerrancy is good, beautiful.
So what do you do with Romans 5 then?
I could twist that all around.
That our sin comes from one person and we inherited death.
Our sin entered the world through one person, sin,
Yeah.
capital S sin. And that is if you follow Pauline theology, it's the character of sin entered the world through one person.
Okay. So, do we inherit goodness?
We inherit goodness. We do not inherit. We are not created in the image of evil. We were created in the image of good.
So, Sharia, what were you going to say? Because I have a so there for.
Yeah, inherit feels funny to me because of how genetic it sounds, but I would say we're born good because we exist.
So I believe that all people, so therefore, this is my so therefore, because I agree with both of you. I believe that we're created in the image of God. And if we're created in the image of God, and the image of God would be all of these values, maybe that I listed off, plus a lot of other values, nature, like my nature is all of these things, or my virtue is all of these things. I might be able to develop the craft of expression of generosity, appreciation, empathy, self-reliance, attentiveness, all that kind of stuff. But those things are embedded in me. And I do agree with the Dalai Lama and I do agree with the Buddhist practice of positive intent, that when we look at others, to have the positive intent that most people want to be good and express goodness.
I think all people want to be good.
Right.
No matter what. Even the outliers.
I think that most people want to be good. I mean, if you listen to some death row inmates, that they've done some pretty bad things. And most of them have a different story in their mind about what occurred. Many of them have a different story that happened in their mind than what the evidence shows. And that's pretty much why they're on death row, is that they had this, like, maybe this out of mind experience, or maybe they had a moment of insanity, or maybe to take a life of another person, you have to have that moment of disassociation in your mind, that this is an option. To take another life is an option. That's a disassociation in mind. And when somebody has that disassociation and then they reflect back, and the stories that I've heard and listened to people, and even people that I've known in prison ministry when I used to go into jails and stuff and listen to people that have killed other people, their version of their life now doesn't reflect that story, that disassociated story. So most people that I've talked to have a much different nature inside of them, even though they killed somebody in the past.
Yeah.
So I would say that whatever that event was, or whatever led up to that event, or all of those pieces that put through, they were put through, or whatever, that ultimately they want to be good.
Which killing people leads to our next issue of the trolley.
It does. Do we kill the one, or do we kill the five? Is that the next issue, or there's more?
Well, part of the issue with it is that you have to be the one to pull the lever. So when you make that choice, like, even if you are saving the five, you are actively choosing to kill one person. And that doesn't feel good.
I think to walk away from the lever is the best choice.
Oof.
And let the chips fall where they may?
Gosh.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Wow.
That's not your choice to make.
Wow.
That's harsh.
Harsh.
That is harsh. Well,
The,
I would.
I
What
can
I
I
would
can I
do.
preface my story?
You're
Well, what I was going to say is that probably the Jesus response would be to leave
Oh.
the lever,
Oh,
to leave
okay.
the lever, and walk onto the track and tell the person to
Get
get off
off
the
the
track.
track.
Yeah.
Take it over. Yeah.
Or maybe the person just needs to tell all the people to get off the track.
Yeah.
You know, don't move the lever. Just tell everybody to get off the track.
I just want to throw out there that there are so many trolley problem memes, and they're my favorite genre of meme.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. Okay, Jake, what were you gonna?
I mean, say you have a party hosted on a track, and there's 5 of you just sitting there and not paying attention to the train coming.
Okay.
I'll just leave that there.
You're drunk on the track. Is that what you're saying, or what?
Anyways, Yellowstone, when it burned really bad, like 15, 20 years ago, can't remember the exact like era it burned. I just know the story. There were
Within our lifetime.
Yeah, within our lifetime. I think my lifetime, maybe.
Yeah.
There's a pack of, I want to say elk, and they were being surrounded by the fire.
Yeah.
And the Forest Service had to make the decision: do we save the elk, or do we let them burn? Do we step in? And I believe that they let them burn because the fire was started by lightning, not a human. And then in other cases, they will save herds because the fire is anthropogenic.
Right.
Started by human and perpetuated by humans. And
And they'll
so,
even put out the fire when that happens.
say again.
And they'll put out the fire when that happens, and they'll make the
put out the
decision
fires.
to
But I
not
mean,
put out the fire.
they fought the
when
other
it's-
fires too, but they just
Yeah.
didn't actively save that herd and divert their resources all there. And so, in our trolley problem, who's pushing the trolley?
Humans.
You sure? You never know. Just could be rolling on
Electricity.
tracks, empty.
Oh, empty. Okay.
Could be empty. I don't see a driver.
I don't see a driver either. But I see that person on the lever. The person that has the handle.
Walk away from the lever.
Tell people to get off the tracks.
Walk away from the lever. Do your best to get people off the track. It's not your decision to make.
So if the group of people are the cocaine collectors.
Sure.
See, when you start adding things into this problem, right? That's when our values kick in and our passions kick in. And we say, let him die. It's kind of like, most of our values are forgiveness. Like as a Christian, our worldview would be built off of forgiveness, reconciliation, would be built off of grace and mercy, would be built off of altruism and generosity, and the death penalty. Doesn't make sense.
No.
So how could that's why Pope John Paul said he didn't believe in the death penalty, because it removed the opportunity of grace and forgiveness on earth. And I really appreciated that.
Penal institutions, penitentiaries,
Yeah.
were started by Quakers so that the death penalty would end. So they could pay penance.
Right.
Or correctional institutions so they'd be corrected and not just thrown away.
So let's discuss some other things, because I want to go back and forth between you and Shreya, Jake and Shreya, and I want to talk about some ethical issues. So Shreya, I'm going to ask you the first one.
Okay.
Okay. So here's an ethical issue. What are human rights versus
Oh,
human privileges?
you want to start there?
I do.
Okay.
I'm going to start with you.
Would it be okay if I divert a little bit because I'm on 1% battery even though I'm plugged in and I got
Yes.
to make a switch real quick.
Yes. Okay. So let's go to another one. Let's
Okay.
start with
See you
Jake then.
soon.
Okay.
So did we
So
wait?
she's just going to switch really quick, I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay. So Jake, you're going to answer the question, should we make everyone normal? I'm just going to ask it that way. I don't want to ask it any other way.
I understand.
And I want you to respond to that. So should we make everyone normal?
Yes. No. So the issue with this question is that normal, or what is normal, are cultural norms that are learned and reinforced by parents, friends, teachers, and others while growing up in a specific society. Norms are different across culture. She was back there for a moment. Norms are different across culture, across boundaries, even across different parts of your own city. So your own little cultural group, that's where your norm or normal comes from. And so we have these ideas of what is normal, and we talk about gender a lot, or LGBTQIA+. And so what is normal in regards to gender or sexual orientation, that's what we hear a lot of. But there's also some other normals that we talk about a lot, but we're not necessarily having an open dialogue with them. We're just accepting the way that we do, and that's the isms. So like, what do we do with age, or what do we do with your ability? Like, do you have ableism, racism, sexism, classism, all these normals of how you should be? Then you get into what is normal and how does your brain act. What is normal? So you have this word called non-neurotypical and neurotypical. Is your brain typical or is it not? The DSM was a Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders in series 5 now, kind of points out what the current understanding for psychological abnormalities are. And so mental and psychological abnormalities, so all the way from autism to MPSI to lots of different things that are there that point out that it's not necessarily normal according to them. There are 5 different variations because normal has changed a lot. And so that manual keeps coming out to be more inclusive, I feel like, of what normal is. And then you have this test called the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. And so it takes your understanding of yourself and puts you on a bell curve, statistical bell curve.
For other people, that's the MMPI. Yeah.
The Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. And that's where you look at yourself and you're understanding the world and how do you line up with other people. Trying to read Rob's comment. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can
and
go
no
back there.
No circles. Yeah.
Yep. There are no circles. But in bell curves, that's what normal is. So we can actually, like, culturally, within your subcontext of culture, we can map out what you think is normal. Because normal is you. Right? So that's kind of the problem with normal, is that when you look at somebody else, should we make everyone normal? The question is, do I make everyone look and act and feel just like me? So what is out of bounds? I would say placing, and we're talking about constructing a new Christian worldview, and we talk about placing Christian norms on unchristian people or not Christian people, but I think it's more of placing church norms or what the church wants to see normal, not necessarily Christianity, Christ, but what institutional church wants to see as normal on unchurched or dechurched people. And all that's doing is expanding the reach of church abuse. So the two litmus tests I have for normal are, does it hold to the image of God? So in your normal, do you uphold or do you break down the image of God? And the image of God is wholeness, it's beautiful, it's love, it's generosity, caring, it's all the things that we experience from God. But the second litmus question is it loving to self and others? So in your own expression of what you want to be normal, are you loving to yourself? Are you loving to the person that you want to be and who you could be? And are you loving to the people around you that love you as well? So that's my ethical issue of, is everyone normal? Or should we make everyone normal? Depends.
Well, that's where the ethical question is then brought into play. Is number one, what is normal? Just because you're unfamiliar with it doesn't mean that it's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where most people are at. Well, that's not normal. Well, that's not your normal. So we have that dilemma. We also have some factors that, something new might be presented. Again, it's not familiar, but maybe it's a part of like a similar community of people living in a certain area, and then something new is introduced that might throw them off of, their normal pattern. So it could be, as simple as, maybe, switching over to, now we're going to move from, traditional power to, solar power, or we're moving to electric cars, or so we start like reacting when these things are introduced. They're new technology. People reacted when the cell phone was invented and people started carrying their phones around, and these reactions over like new ideas or new things. There's simple things like that throw us off from normal. So should we all be doing these things, or should we all be participating, or is it okay that all of us participate in these things? We have that, maybe some what I'll call external forces or external ideas. But then we have like our human person. And you brought up like the LGBTQIA plus community. And I think that Christians have really, number one, done a really terrible job in showing love and addressing lots of different communities of people with kindness and compassion and generosity and grace and such. But I had a professor address this issue a long time ago when it came to trans or LGBTQ in general, that there's actually our genetics or our DNA, in a sense, our chromosomes, are not necessarily a consistent pattern of normal. So we all have variations of our chromosomes. We all have variations of our genetic makeup. And so to judge somebody so harshly because they don't fit a certain like standard or your standard, he addressed it in a way he was talking about how our genetics really are expressed in so many different ways, and different patterns and different, like, I would say even our sex assignments are so varied, and you have percentages and statistical percentages that you can base, conclusions on of just the human, community of people living on earth. There's just so much variation to human community that for us to look at the human part, just the human community, and to say this is normal or this is not normal in even our way we express ourselves as human, the way that we, our sexual preferences, or even, somebody that is experiencing, a something connected to trans, that we need to be very, very careful with our finger pointing and our judgments. It's wrong because there is so much variation just in the human condition and who we are. So what is normal? It's very difficult to address normal in such things. But then we have a filter. And remember the ethical filter? Our ethical filter needs to then kick in, and we have a care lens, we have a love lens, we have a compassion lens, we have a humanity lens that I think Christians have forgotten to look through a lot of times.
When we try to put the label of normal on anyone, no one's normal. No one.
Yeah, because just the human community is so diverse and variant. Is that a word? Variant?
Ratified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no such thing as normal. So, like, the question of should we make everyone normal? I think the better response would be to make everyone abnormal.
Well, the reason why I bring up the subject that I did is I heard a preacher just here recently say that trans is a myth.
Huh.
And it bothered me. It bothered me a lot because I know people and I have talked to people and have not necessarily, a deep relationship with the community, but I know people who do. And to say that something is a myth is just like discounting somebody's human experience. And you call that an invalidation of somebody's being. And that's just not what Jesus would ever do. Jesus actually addressed different people in the crowds, in the Sermon on the Mount, in a way that certain people will attain higher, like even blessing in the kingdom because of their quote abnormal. So, like, not to say that certain people are abnormal, but he addressed people in a certain way that those that are marginalized on the outside or not considered part of the in crowd will be attaining the first place at the seating table than others. So I think that as Christians, we need to be very careful with this. Should we make everybody normal? And you're right, Jake, what is normal?
But also what comes up for me is that I think that idea of normal is just a form of control. And
yeah,
I think that trying to have control is antithetical to a Christian worldview.
I mean, I think you're exactly right that's trying to set the standard of what is normal is anti-Christian. Yet mathematically, we know what normal is.
Because of the bell curves.
Because of bell curves, we know what normal is. Yet, when we put policy and politic and on to what we think normal should be and not follow, I'll say even science, because like that is a measuring tool that we use. And I'm speaking more to the MMPI at the moment, that we know what normal is, and we know when we have deviated from normal, right? And
can I pause you for a second? Because I want to gain some understanding. So just because a bell curve says something about a current society, right? So normal height for males living in the United States in Oregon, right, is this, whatever that normal height is.
Yeah.
But 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. So is it normal, quote, are you saying for the era of time?
For the current culture and position that you're in, your current place and culture, you can tell what normal is. I mean, you can tell what normal is for the entire world if you're going to take it a very huge MMPI and actually put it over all of the world, and everyone takes it. But if you have a group of people and they take it together, or you have like white males from 30 to 50, or you have white females from 30 to 50, each of those things, we can statistically say what is normal. Mathematically, statistically, scientifically, we know what's normal.
I have an idea.
Are you saying normal or common?
Normal. The scientific understanding of normal.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just needed some clarity because that word is just kind of hitting my shoulders wrong.
Yeah. I think part of it, though, is do we view normal as descriptive or prescriptive? Because normal can just describe what is common, what is typical, maybe. But if it's just describing, that's completely different than saying this is the way things ought to be.
Yeah, and so
okay, so there's okay. So if Jesus' truths, right, transcend all time.
Okay.
Right. Then does our normal should that speak what things ought to be or what things are?
Do you want to answer first, Shreya?
I can try. It's going to be a word salad instead of a coherent thought.
Okay, then I can answer, and then you
make sure there's croutons on there, please.
To me, what you do with those truths make you normal or abnormal.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, what was coming up for me was definitely the difference between like action and being.
Exactly, like what we do with an action.
Yeah, is what makes the difference.
And so if you take the position that all truth is subjective and based, all truths are socioeconomic axioms that are based upon objective truth. And the objective truth is the person of God and the personality of God. Jesus' truth is objective. And we base all action, all of our subjective truths, because all of what we think are true is actually subjective truth, upon that person, Jesus, because that is the only truth that we have. That's the only compass. Then really how we respond to that becomes our normal.
Okay, so pause for a second, because I think that we're on to some good stuff here. So Christians,
Hmm.
Christians have spoken for a very long time about how things ought to be.
Yeah.
Yet when you spend so much time in how things ought to be, you're not living in reality. And when you don't live in reality long enough, that's a psychological disorder.
You're
You
no
have an
longer
alter.
normal.
You're an
Are you
alternate. You're
telling me
living
that?
in an alternate reality.
You're
Are you
outside the
telling
bell
So,
me
curve.
that Christians have a disorder?
well, some people think that. So I think that a Christian ethic and a Christian belief, a Christian value, ethic, and passion should be, yes, the world ought to be a certain way. Yet the reality is the world is this way. And the Christian ethic is, how do we behave in the world that is this way?
And also, how do we help the world become this way?
Okay. So there's some really complex things though when you start
Yeah.
imposing your version of how the world ought to be onto. So like love, so how do you know what truth is? That which is closer to love than far away. So if heaven is a place of love, that is a truth about the way that the world ought to be. If
Hmm.
Jesus, if like I've said before, if I'm a parent and the one thing that I want my children to know more than anything on the planet, no matter what they do, who they claim to be, or what they become, or what job they hold, no matter what, if they have no job, no matter what, I want my children to know that I love them. Right? So if God is anything like me and my feelings towards my children, God's children, that is what God wants us to know as well. And our expression of that is heaven. So the truth that I need to bind myself to is God loves me and God loves you. And no matter who you are, no matter what you claim to be, what you're doing, not doing, saying, not saying, no matter the mistakes that you make, the one thing that God wants you to know is that you are loved. Period.
Hmm.
That's the way the world ought to be. But for some reason, we have found ourselves as Christians crafting a certain like, for example, with gay rights or gay marriage or some of the LGBTQ discussions, we have developed a sexual ethic versus a love ethic. Or when it comes to morality, in general, we have this moral ethic versus a grace ethic. And I think a grace ethic transcends all time, no matter what common or normal or abnormal is at the moment. So grace and love transcend all time. Forgiveness transcends all time, right? Reconciliation transcends all time. So those are the ethics, or those are the values that I think need to speak very loudly that are not speaking, because our worldview is to make the world into the version of what I think it ought to be. I don't know, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
You're agreeing with some eye rolls.
I'm not trying to roll my eyes. I'm just, looking up at my brain to think. The thoughts in there somewhere.
There's thoughts in there somewhere. Okay, Sharia,
Yeah.
we got to get to your at least one.
At least one of them.
Yeah.
Can you read the question? Because I didn't write it all the way down.
What are human rights versus privileges? What are human rights versus human privileges?
Yeah. So starting with the story of the Bible, the first thing that I was thinking about was in the Exodus story, the manna in the desert. That food was there. God provided water. God provided community. And in the words of Daniel Erlander, everyone has enough and no one has too much. And I think that's a very simple, but also beautiful encapsulation of our rights as humans. I also thought about in the Sermon on the Mount, this is in Matthew 6, 25 through 26. So, Rob, if you have that one to toss up on the screen. And if you don't, I will have to grab my phone very quickly.
Right there, Shreya.
Right there.
Perfect. Thank you. Therefore, I say to you, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds in the sky. They don't sow seed or harvest grain or gather crops into barns. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth much more than they are? And I think right here we see Jesus and, I guess by proxy, God, acknowledging that we need things in order to live, and that it's important to God that those needs are met. So I think the idea of rights and what we have a right to is tied to what our needs are. We need food to live, and so food is a right. We need water to live. Water is a right. The other thing I was thinking about, I took an Understanding Judaism class in seminary, and they brought in a rabbi. And during our Q&A section, someone asked her what Jews believe about abortion. Which is a really broad topic. You know, I don't think it would be fair to nail down the opinions of an entire religious group, you know, based on one person.
Yeah, I speak for all of Christianity.
Right, exactly. But what she said was, you know, Americans love to talk about their rights. In Judaism, we ask, what is your responsibility? And that's just stuck in my brain anytime a conversation about rights comes up. Because I think the posture is different. Asking about our rights is a posture of receiving, whereas asking about our responsibilities is a posture of giving. And I do think that a posture of giving is more reflective of who Jesus is.
So when you were talking, I was reminded of our United States Constitution. And our United States Constitution outlines our constitutional rights as Americans. Freedom of speech, you know, things like that. And I think things like that, there's a list. Bill of Rights. Go look it up.
Please, and actually read it.
Yeah. Not name calling, or not calling anybody out. So I think as United States citizens, right, we confuse our constitutional rights with human rights.
Yeah. Right.
Say more.
Well, I think that there is a platform to develop a national right to this or that, because you live in a nation, and that nation is going to protect you in different ways, and maybe different like values and ethics that the lawmakers and the government branch, think are important for the people. So other nations have different types of regulating booklets that they use as well, that protect or don't protect certain rights for that nation. But there is a difference between a national set of rights and human rights. So let's just unpack that just a little bit. Jake, say more yourself.
I want to say more if you need more time.
Yeah, go for it. Sharia, say more.
Like, I don't have the Bill of Rights memorized.
Yeah.
But does it grant us the right to enough to eat? Does it grant us the right to shelter? I think some of the difference there between what we would call human rights and constitutional rights is that human rights do kind of come down more to basic needs.
Yeah.
And constitutional rights maybe assume that those basic needs are being met. But in a lot of cases, they aren't.
Freedom of religion, freedom of speech,
right.
Freedom to bear arms, freedom of assembly,
mm-hmm.
freedom of like no search and seizure. There's lots of different
mm-hmm.
right to a jury, right to you're not going to have excessive bail, those types of things.
Constitutional rights, be it in any formed government currently, protect only those who are in power. They're for protection. They're not for the expansion of welfare.
Mm-hmm.
And so the right to bear arms was to have a well-formed and trained militia so that each state could at one point break off and have their own entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they had control,
their own
power.
Army.
Yeah. But even their own government, their own country. The pursuit of happiness, right?
They could vote to leave the United States.
Yes, but in
the
order
states
to vote,
that are united,
in order to vote in the Constitution, you had to own land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
back in the day. Yeah.
Back in the day. And I'm not sure when or how that changed right now because I'm just not up to my constitutional.
Yeah. Sure, it's okay.
Anything. Yeah, thanks. But human rights and privileges look at wealth and say, how do I say this without going too far?
Well, let me pause. Let's pause for a second because you said a lot there.
I can keep
Are
going,
you saying that a national set of rights are privileges or rights?
As the definition stands, they are privileges.
So
the Bill of Rights is just a bunch of privileges that people gave themselves because they own land.
People who owned land gave themselves. Yeah.
Correct.
Right. So Senator Kennedy said that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. He said that till the day he died. So he had a lot of conviction. Mm-hmm. That was a value. So is healthcare something like that, Sharia, because that's a need?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that's a right or a privilege?
I think so. I think it ought to be a right.
That's the way the world ought to be. Yeah.
In the nation that we are in and how much wealth that we have, healthcare should not even be questioned, that it is a right and privilege granted to all people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of ethics behind that because, well, let's take our ethic of health, right? If I'm a healthy person and you're saying that healthcare or Sharia said that needs are human needs like manna from heaven and like even Jesus and feeding the 5,000, food and needs, like really human needs are rights, not privileges. Those are rights. So let's just throw in Jesus had healthcare vouchers in those baskets too of fish and loaves, right?
Jesus healed people.
Yeah, well, he did. Yeah, but he gave a voucher, like cash in on this later. So Jesus was a healthcare
Come on by
practitioner.
later.
Come by later. I'll fix you up. So you're saying healthcare is a right, but I'm a healthy person, right? I try to keep my weight down. I don't smoke. I don't, inject myself with, meth. I don't, heroin. I don't take fentanyl. I don't, I run on a consistent basis. I eat vegan. I try my very best to keep myself healthy. So are you saying that because healthcare is a right, how about the schmuck down the road that smokes and drinks himself to sleep every night and, injects himself with all kinds of drugs, and I have to pay for his healthcare?
Are you saying he's not normal?
Well, that's what, I guess the counter argument to what you're saying is like, okay, so you're going to take my pursuit of happiness away or my money away to pay for the schlep down the road that doesn't take care of themselves like I do.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
There's a reason that he just schlepped down the road. There's a reason that he smokes. There's a reason that he drinks himself to sleep, and that also has to do with healthcare. And it's the ideal that if the other person's actually healthy, they'll contribute more to society. And so you'll actually get a greater return on your investment, any investment that you have, if you focus on healthcare and give healthcare to all people, because they will essentially be better utilities for you to use.
That sounds very authoritarian to me.
It is putting it in economic terms.
It is basic utilitarianism.
So I'm not going to point what direction, but I have a person that is located on my street close to me. And that person is not healthy. They're wealthy. They're not healthy.
Can't you point in every direction?
Oh.
That person is healthy. Yeah, exactly. Okay, exactly. So
we can all point in every direction.
Every direction. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Around me, right, is a bunch of unhealthy and wealthy people. So as they are unhealthy, my health care goes up because I live in this area, and statistically that's how healthcare works, or payments. So I should pay for them to be more healthy, or excuse me, basically I should pay to maybe perpetuate their problems, or maybe band-aid their problems, and maybe even make them more wealthy. Because if I band-aid their problem and get them back to work, they make more money and they can become wealthier. They're not fixing their health. They're just band-aiding their problem, taking some medication or whatever.
I don't think that healthcare has to do with just taking medication, though.
Yeah.
Well, sure. There's a lot of holistic ideas in healthcare. Okay.
And so if you look at socialist healthcare systems, they're usually more preventative and not what's the opposite?
Responsive?
Preventative health, and you have the other health.
Yeah.
Is there a word for it? Health.
The medical system as we know it.
the U.S. medical system. And so you have like Canada, right? Had an employee that I think got strep throat while she was climbing in Canada, bouldering. She went to the doctor, and the doctor just took her phone number down and then tested her, and for $5 she got out. She was relatively healthy, but for $5 she got out with antibiotics, right?
Okay.
And a
So
doctor's visit.
Doctor's visit, prescribed, taken care of. And so as a whole entire system,
Do you
the
want to
more
pay Canadian tax?
Sure. I already do.
It's high.
We already
That's
do.
fine. It's just our money's being funneled to like corporations and oil and stuff instead of actual social services.
Well, that's probably a little bit true
Please
there.
give my taxes to food stamps. That'd be fine.
Yeah, okay.
I think I pay a higher percentage of taxes than any billionaire or millionaire, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't looked at tax law in a while.
Not in a long time.
So my friend was preaching the other day, and I was listening to one of my good friends, and he said human rights are God-given, and privileges are privileges are distributed by the people who have the biggest stick.
Okay.
I actually really believe that statement. It kind of goes along with Jake's idea of the people in power rights, or constitutional rights, or national right ideas are held by the people in power, or really benefit the people in power. So we shouldn't be, as Christians, I don't want to put anybody on a should contract. Our worldview needs to be geared more towards the orphan, the widow, the prostitute, the marginalized Samaritan, the person that's not accepted, the person that's thought of as the outcast, those that live on the margins. Our worldview should be geared towards those people, not the pursuit of my own just happiness. Of course, I want to be happy, but there's that idea of pursuit.
Can I interject one thing for that?
Maybe the pursuit. Hold on, pursuit of others. Go ahead.
The pursuit of happiness, as defined in the Constitution, is the pursuit of owning property.
Okay. So maybe instead of just like pursuit of owning property or pursuit of wealth building, maybe my pursuit should be of others that are marginalized.
Correct.
And maybe that's where my worldview, my ethic, does that transcend all of time?
Yes.
So if we give the whole world an MMPI and we come up with a normal bell curve of what is normal, right? Does pursuing the marginalized to feed the poor, clothe the naked, give to those that don't have, shelter the shelterless, pursue the marginalized, those that live on the margins, does that I think that transcends all time. And transcends wherever that bell curve shifts too, right? So a Christian ethic worldview, somewhere in that worldview, needs to say that we will pursue those that are marginalized, that we will love the marginalized.
The lost sheep. I mean, gosh, that's an easy crossover.
Well, that's always reserved for the person who leaves the church.
But that's not true.
Because of the music. I mean, that's where we put those scriptures, right?
Right.
We got to go after that person because they don't like the music, so we need to get them back in church. They're the lost sheep.
I think what I really like about what you were saying is that a lot of times in Christian circles, we say things like we need to love everybody, which is true. But when that's what we focus on, we end up loving the people who are like us.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that tends to be who are around. So
I like people just like me.
Right. So a purposeful, intentional, we pursue the people who are left out is really important to a Christian worldview and the person of Jesus.
It's great.
So instead of making everybody normal, maybe we just need to follow what Jesus would do and pursue those that don't fit a norm. They're not fitting that
Mhm.
norm, whatever our cultural common is. Maybe that's what Jesus was telling us to do. Gosh, 2 questions. We got to 2. We had
Out of 5.
5 out of 5. We got 2. At least we got those 2. Hey, let's pick it up next week.
Mhm.
Maybe we'll have time for a couple of more. But I really like this discussion. Thanks, you guys, for having it with me. I really like what you
Yeah.
have to say, both of you. All right. Good night,
Very fun.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us.
Good night.